Well, welcome once again to the roller coaster known as the Middle East peace process. Just when it looks like you're on the brink of some big breakthrough, somebody does something totally unexpected, and it leaves us scratching our heads saying, okay, why did they do that? The latest development is that Hamas and the Fatah organization, which is headed by Mahmoud Abbas, have announced they have reached a reconciliation agreement, which means that would bring them back together. Let me see if I can give you the rough outline of what actually has happened. The Gaza-based Islamist group Hamas and Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas's Palestinian Liberation Organization agreed on Wednesday to implement a unity pact, both sides announced in a joint news conference. The move envisions forming a unity government within 5 weeks and holding national elections 6 months after a vote of confidence by the Palestinian parliament. Palestinians have long hoped for a healing of the political rift between the PLO and militant Hamas, which won a Palestinian election in 2006 and seized control of the Gaza Strip from forces loyal to Western-backed Abbas in 2007. But Arab-brokered unity pacts reached between the two sides previously. This has been announced several times, by the way. None of these have ever yet been implemented, leaving many Palestinians skeptical about their leader's recent reconciliation pledge. This is the good news we tell our people. The era of division is over, Hamas Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh told Palestinian reporters, to hold their applause. Hamas has repeatedly battled Israel, which it refuses to recognize. Before Wednesday's announcement, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu cautioned Abbas over the unity efforts, saying he had to choose between peace with Israel or peace with its Islamist enemy, Hamas. Okay, now what's this really all about? Hamas has maintained that Israel has no right to exist. Hamas does not accept Israel's right to exist. Hamas's goal in its existence is to annihilate the nation of Israel. In the meantime, Mahmoud Abbas has been negotiating with Israel, claiming to want to come to a peace agreement. Now, all of a sudden, this new announcement that Hamas and Mahmoud Abbas and the PLO have reached a reconciliation agreement to bring them back together. Okay, now, how is this going to work then? So Abbas is attempting to make peace with Israel, but Hamas refuses to recognize Israel at all. So why would Abbas make this move at this time? I don't know for positive that I know the answer, but I've been pondering it all day long. Could it be that in the private talks, which we do not know exactly what's been said behind closed doors, but could it be that Abbas perceives that the distance between Israel and the Palestinians is so far that it cannot be bridged? For instance, Abbas says unless there is a Palestinian state created with East Jerusalem as its capital, there will be no peace agreement. Netanyahu has been reported to be absolutely set in concrete against surrendering East Jerusalem as the capital of the nation of Israel. So, if the two positions are so far apart that Abbas sees, okay, I'm not going to get an agreement, therefore, let's shake things up and let's announce a reconciliation agreement with Hamas. Now, once that's done, the United Nations is so totally on the side of the Palestinians and against Israel that perhaps Abbas knows that he can get admitted to the United Nations even though he's making this move with Hamas. Now remember, they've announced reconciliation agreements several times so far. But when it comes time for Haniyeh or Abbas to be the head of the unified entity, neither one will compromise. Neither one will subordinate himself to the other. So it falls apart. Now, there's no details announced here except to say that they will form a unity government within 5 weeks. But they've announced this repeatedly, and they haven't done it in 5 years. So what's going to happen? Now, the result of this is that Israel has announced the cancellation of peace talks, which were to be held today, in an effort to get the negotiations back on track and to extend those negotiations for another 9 months. Now Israel says, we're not talking to an entity that is holding unification talks with an organization that has vowed to annihilate us. That would be absolutely absurd. So Israel has now canceled the planned peace talks. And so will there be more peace talks? Is it dead in the water? All that John Kerry and President Obama have done over the last 9 months, did it just go flushed down the drain just now? Well, we don't know the answer to that yet. But what do we know? We know there's going to be a peace agreement. Some way, somehow. We do not know how, but we know there's going to be a Palestinian state created. We know Jews are going to be left out to live under the government of that Palestinian state. We know the Temple Mount is going to be placed under a sharing arrangement, either by agreement or by edict from the nation of Israel. We also know that the Temple Mount is going to be placed under international authority. Those are the things that we know. So how do we get from where we are today to there? Could this set the timetable back? Could this mean that the war that kills 1/3 of mankind will happen first? Will it be that kind of a shock that's needed to move these negotiations off of dead center? Again, these are questions that John Kerry doesn't have the answer to, that Barack Obama doesn't have the answer to. They don't know as much about it as you and I do because they don't have the advantage of the prophecies of the Bible, which we do have. So here we are now. This is what's going on. Where do we head from here? Now, all of you know we have been driving to prepare to send a magazine to every home in Israel once a peace agreement is signed. John Kerry had announced the goal of signing that peace agreement by April the 29th. Well, he's going to have to hurry because there's only 6 days left. It looks like that goal is not going to be obtained. Now, what are we going to do with the money that we've collected to send a magazine to every home in Israel? We're going to put it in an account because it's going to happen, and we must be ready when it happens. So all that you have given so far is going to be placed in an account waiting for the time that the trigger is pulled. Now, I don't see how it can last too long, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, there's too much tension over the Temple Mount. There's too much tension over Abbas going to the United Nations and applying for membership there. There's too much tension over demographics and the fact that very shortly now the Arabs could outnumber the Jews within Israel. So where do we go from here? Well, actually, nobody knows. John Kerry is not visiting the Middle East trying to salvage things. He does have representatives there. They have been meeting up until today. The meeting scheduled for today was canceled. Now, do they still try to pull a rabbit out of a hat? Or do they just let the thing go and say, when you guys are ready to have peace, call us? I mean, that's what James Baker did back in 1991. Ultimately, that seemed to move both parties toward the Oslo Peace Accords, which were concluded in 1993. Whatever the case, we're here. A Palestinian peace agreement is here. What's the gap between the two? 3 months? 6 months? A year? What kind of emergency meetings are being held behind closed doors right now? There's a lot of things being said. For example, Mr. Yair Lapid, who is part of the coalition government with Benjamin Netanyahu, is worried by the Hamas-Fatah deal. Now, Lapid had said, if you don't conclude peace talks with the Palestinians, we're pulling out of your government. But now then, with this development, how can he pull out of the government? Is he going to criticize Netanyahu for not talking to people that have vowed to destroy the nation of Israel? Probably not. Let me just read a little bit of what Finance Minister Yair Lapid had to say. He is generally portrayed as a centrist secularist, but he's worried about the deal between Fatah and Hamas. Speaking at the EJC conference Wednesday evening, Lapid said that he is troubled by the question, do the Palestinians really want a state? If the answer to this question is yes, he went on, they can have a state in 6 months' time. He explained that his party favors giving the Palestinians 90% of Judea, Samaria, Gaza, recognition in the UN, and freedom. Instead of agreeing to these terms, said Lapid, they have now reached an accord with Hamas. Hamas is not a government. It is a jihadi terror organization with a stated goal of killing civilians, women, children, old people, only because they are Jews. How do you want to reach an agreement with us? He asked. Now, that's what's going on right now. Even the liberal wing is not finding fault with Netanyahu. So, is this going to be put off for 6 months or a year? We'll have to see.